No emulators were used in the production of this podcast.
That's awesome, sweetie. Thank you. Welcome to the Atari Jaguar Game by Game podcast, where we take a close look at Atari's last home video game console and its library, one game at a time. I am your host, Shinto J. Podkaskowitz, and in this episode we are discussing part number J9028, Wolfenstein 3D. Wolfenstein 3D is a 2MB cartridge developed by id Software and released by Atari in August of 1994. It is a first-person shooter for one player and carries no ESRB rating. I believe this will be the last game that I cover to have been released prior to full ESRB adoption, but there is a notice on the back of the box indicating that the game includes graphic violence, which is certainly the case. In the original PC version of Wolfenstein 3D, there is a plain light blue screen with a voluntary rating of PC-13 displayed in the bottom right corner. PC for Profound Carnage, it says. The 3DO version of the game, which was released 5 months later, includes a rating of M for mature, so keep that in mind if you're considering whether or not this game is appropriate for your children. id Software is an American video game development company founded in 1991 by John Romero, John Carmack, Adrian Carmack, no relation, and Tom Hall. Alfonso John Romero was born in 1967 and at an early age showed a remarkable artistic aptitude. He loved arcade games and was quite adept at Asteroids and Pac-Man. In 1979, he started going to Sierra College, not as a student at 12 years old, but to hang out in the computer lab, which the actual students were cool with. He got into Colossal Cave Adventure and soon wrote his own text adventure game on punch cards that later proved tenuous. Not terribly reliable, that punch card system. Sierra College got in some Apple II computers a little while later, and Romero moved over to those with their color screens and actual graphics and programmed with a keyboard instead of punch cards. He would play games like Ultima and Castle Wolfenstein, but was working on his own games as well, and was spending so much time at Sierra College that his stepfather bought an Apple II computer for their home so that he could keep a closer eye on the boy. Romero started sending in his games to Apple II magazines, and by the time he was out of high school, he had 10 titles published in this manner, and at least one made it to the cover. Between this and contest prizes he was receiving, he started referring to himself as John Romero, Ace Programmer.
Alrighty then.
No, that's Ace Ventura, Pet Detective. That's totally different. In 1987, San Francisco, there was a gathering of Apple enthusiasts called Apple Fest, which had some heavy hitters in the industry. One of the magazines that bought his games, was called Uptime, offered him a job right there, but Romero really wanted to work for Origin Systems. His job application at Origin, as it were, was both brazen and memorable. Origin's booth was showing off Ultima 5. Romero walked up, slid his floppy disk into one of their Apple IIs, and loaded up a game he wrote called Lethal Labyrinth. A lot of his early games included alliteration in the title. And this game used a difficult technique to double the resolution on the screen. It looked far better than the brand new Ultima game Origin was showing off, and they were impressed. So he went to work for Origin in November of 1987, and when his boss left to start a new company, Romero followed him. That was not a good decision in hindsight. The new company faltered, and so Romero, needing a job, called up the guy from Uptime. But his contact, Jay Wilbur, was actually on the way out, leaving Uptime and going to a competitor, a monthly disc subscription provider called SoftDisk, and invited Romero to come along. Alfonso John Carmack is not his name. John Carmack, John D. Carmack, was born in 1970. He didn't start talking until he was able to speak in complete sentences at 15 months old. Full sentences right off the bat. At 7 years old, he was maxing out the standardized tests at school, placing his comprehension level among those twice his age. At 8, he was designing elaborate Dungeons & Dragons campaigns. His parents wisely placed him in a gifted and talented program, which had an Apple II computer lab and other gifted students with whom he could write code and create worlds. But when his parents divorced, he hopped back and forth between schools with no such program. He found a home, if only a philosophical one, in the hacker ethic, thanks to a book called Hackers, Heroes of the Computer Revolution by Stephen Levy. But he was separated from this culture both geographically and virtually until he discovered bulletin board systems. There he learned about games, phone phreaking, and, making thermite. He used thermite to melt the glass windows at a school so that he could get in and use their Apple II computers, but got caught and spent a year in juvenile detention. After he got out, his parents did buy him an Apple II computer, and he got into graphics programming, sold his first game to a publisher for $1,000. Still, his mother didn't think that there was a future in game programming. Carmack dropped out of college after 2 semesters, and wrote his second game, selling that to the same publisher for $2,000. He started selling his games to a monthly disc subscription provider named SoftDisk, who badly wanted him to work for them full-time. Romero and Carmack really hit it off. As they worked together, they fell into roles, Carmack specializing in the game engine, and Romero in game design and tools. It was a match made in, Shreveport, Louisiana. While Romero was an accomplished artist, pixel art wasn't really what he wanted to spend his time creating, so the team pulled in Adrian Carmack, an underutilized intern at SoftDisk. SoftDisk created mostly utility and productivity applications for IBM PC compatibles and especially the Apple II, but the Apple II was on its way out, and games for the PC platform were seen as the way forward. PCs, though, were slow and lacked the sound and graphics capabilities that were conducive to video games. Still, Carmack was able to learn new tricks in his game engines after Romero convinced SoftDisk to give them 2 months to create each game, not just 1 month per game. This new bi-monthly game disc magazine was called Gamer's Edge, and their first original title was a smoothly scrolling top-down shooter called Slordax, the Unknown Enemy. Tom Hall is credited as creative director in Slordax. He worked in the Apple II department at SoftDisk, but he and Romero were friends with a weird synergy between them. Hall was wildly creative, and the Gamer's Edge team tried to pull him in whenever they could. The Nintendo Entertainment System was kind of a big thing around this time, and Super Mario Bros. 3 was kind of a big game for the system, selling something on the order of 17 million copies worldwide. This kind of game, a side-scrolling platform game, just wasn't possible on DOS computers. The hardware wasn't designed for this sort of thing. The vertically scrolling Slordax was an impressive feat, but horizontal scrolling? No, hadn't been done. But John Carmack was working on it, and one late afternoon in September of 1990, he cracked it. He showed it to Tom Hall, who was also in the office at the time, and Hall got the idea that they should use this new engine to recreate the first level of Super Mario Bros. 3, like right then, that day. Hall worked on the graphics, repeatedly playing and pausing their in-office Nintendo for reference, while Carmack continued on the engine. Instead of Mario, though, they had used the character graphics for Dangerous Dave, which was a title character for one of Romero's Apple II games, which he had just ported over to the PC, so the graphics were handy. By the end of the night, they had a playable demo on floppy disk and left it on Romero's desk. When John Romero rolled in the next morning, typically worked 10 a.m. to 10 p.m., he saw the disc, loaded it up, and got a title screen with Dangerous Dave on the left and a gavel-wielding judge on the right. The name of the game, Dangerous Dave and Copyright Infringement. He started playing and was blown away, as in totally and completely speechless for hours. Here it was on his screen, the future of PC gaming. The problem, though, was that the horizontal scrolling trick required an EGA graphics adapter. That's redundant. EGA stands for Enhanced Graphics Adapter. Anyway, it's a step up from CGA, Color Graphics Adapter, going from 4 colors to 16 and with a much higher graphics resolution. The problem was that SoftDisk wanted to appeal to the lowest common denominator. You can't release stuff that requires hardware that your customers may not have. It had to be backwards compatible with CGA, and the engine just couldn't do that. Softdisk wasn't going to publish anything with this engine, so Romero was convinced that now was the time to start a new video game development company. He confided in Jay Wilbur, remember from Uptime magazine. He'd known him for years and trusted him. So Jay, the two Johns, Adrian, and Tom decided that their first course of action would be to create a high-quality demo of Super Mario Bros. 3 for the PC and offer their services to Nintendo, to Shigeru Miyamoto himself. The problem was that they didn't really have any decent computers of their own with which to write this unofficial port, so they kind of borrowed their Softdisk-owned computers. Risky? Sure. Illegal? Quite probably. They loaded the machines up in their cars Friday night after everyone else left, and drove to a rented lake house where they worked for 72 hours on the port, living off of pizza, Diet Coke, and the intoxicating high of hack mode. Ah yeah, hack mode. They needed a name for this company, and used the one that Romero and his friend Lane Roth chose for their fledgling game development company before joining Softdisk. Ideas from the Deep, and when they... Wait, I think that needs an echo. Do you think it needs an echo? Let's try that again. They used the name Ideas from the Deep. And when they got the response back from Nintendo, it was disappointing. Nintendo was only interested in publishing games for their own platform, a position they held quite firmly until just recently, 2015. Alright, so with Nintendo out, they needed to do something original, and Tom pitched the idea for Commander Keen, an 8-year-old genius who builds a rocket powered by his dad's bottle of Everclear and fights aliens called Vorticons. They also needed a publisher, and found one by the name of Apogee, which specialized in shareware titles. A very quick description of shareware. You write software, distribute it for free over bulletin board systems or for the cost of a floppy disk, and ask people to pay for it if they like the software and want to keep it. What Apogee did that was slightly different was they distributed, say, a few levels of a game, and then with the shareware fee, provided the rest of the game. The model worked well with fast action games which were episodic in nature. The Ideas from the Deep team worked pretty much non-stop between October and December to finish Commander Keen in time for Christmas, still using the Softdisk computers for development, picking them up at the end of the day and returning the machines early the next morning. The game was a critical and popular success, a resounding smash hit. They were still working on games for Gamer's Edge, too, and despite burning the candle at both ends, those games were also well received. But all that fell apart in January. Softdisk learned about the moonlighting, Carmack came clean, he wasn't much for lying, and after threats and negotiations and more threats, Softdisk and Ideas from the Deep reached an agreement where the latter would not be sued and continued to provide a game to Gamer's Edge every other month. It was time to form their own company. id Software, ID, for Ideas from the Deep, or In Demand, or that Freudian part of the brain that unconsciously controls one's basic instinctive drives. It's all good. I should note here that while id Software wasn't formally founded until February 1st, 1991, according to two different sources, Commander Keen did seem to be released with that name, rather than Ideas from the Deep, or IFD. So I guess they were thinking ahead. id Software bought their own computers, and without the pretense of driving into the office every day, they worked nearly constantly from the lake house. Carmack started working on 3D game engines, fast-action 3D games. The first such release was called Hover Tank, with flat-colored walls and scaled sprites for enemies that you shoot. He improved the engine with texture-mapped walls and a hand in the bottom center of the screen which cast fireballs in a game called Catacomb 3D. Apogee wanted to have a game that was similar in design to Catacomb 3D, but structured like a shareware game. After kicking around some ideas, they landed on a remake of the Silas Warner game Castle Wolfenstein, but in 3D. They were able to use the name Wolfenstein because the trademark had lapsed after the publisher of the original title, Muse Software, went bankrupt in the mid-80s. Castle Wolfenstein was set in World War II and was a stealth game before stealth games were a thing. You would need to do things like drag the bodies of Nazi soldiers out of the way so that they aren't discovered by other patrols. This was built into Wolfenstein 3D. There was a button to drag the bodies out of the way. But id Software thought that this distracted from the action and decided to make it a full-out action game. For audio, they enlisted the help of game musician Bobby Prince, with whom they had worked on the Commander Keen games. The original Castle Wolfenstein and its sequel also had speech, a true rarity back in 1981. The game was initially on the Apple II, though it saw later ports to the Commodore 64, Atari 8-bit, IBM PC, and possibly others. I tried this out briefly on my Atari 800XL and captured an Octoon. I did the same for the Apple II, but since I don't have an Apple II, I used a YouTube video. 1984's Beyond Castle Wolfenstein had much better sampled speech. Digitized sounds were something added to Wolfenstein 3D as well, but only if you had a sound blaster or compatible sound card. Without one, you'd get sounds like this. But with a sound blaster or compatible, you get this. Quite a difference. I'll be talking about that later when I get into my history with the game. Wolfenstein 3D was huge. Id Software was pulling in between $100,000 and $150,000 per month in shareware registration fees. There was also a retail release using the same engine and positioned as a prequel to Wolfenstein 3D called Spear of Destiny. It did not sell quite as well. However, Nintendo paid id Software an additional $100,000 to make a Super Nintendo version of Wolfenstein 3D. To handle this port, id Software contracted with a notable developer named Bill Heinemann, now known as Rebecca Heinemann, but at the time had the nickname Burger due to large bulk purchases of cheap hamburgers from a restaurant called Hamburger Stand that would go into a desk drawer for consumption throughout the week. They had no fridge at that office. I remember that place, Hamburger Stand. Rather liked their burgers, too, as a kid. But Heinemann had a problem. An employment contract with Interplay meant that any game programming performed, even after hours, belonged to Interplay. So id Software couldn't even touch the code, let alone release it to Nintendo, and basically had to start over with the deadline fast approaching. John Carmack handled the ports, taking time off from working on id Software's follow-up game, which was called Doom. Nintendo had other requirements, too. They wanted the removal of all Nazi imagery, all German speech, any religious symbology, any blood, all the attack dogs, and anything that looked like Adolf Hitler. Id wasn't happy about this, but hey, $100,000 in a signed contract, what can you do? Aside from being whacked with a censor stick, Wolfenstein 3D on the Super Nintendo incorporated several other rather significant gameplay differences when compared to the DOS version. The story is different. Well, even taking into account the lack of Nazis, the story is different. The chronology is different. The storyline may be roughly set between Spear of Destiny and the original DOS version of Wolfenstein 3D. There are new weapons and pickup items, which are pretty notable. The first one adds a rocket launcher and a flamethrower with separate ammunition for both. It adds a backpack that allows you to carry extra ammo, like 299 rounds instead of the DOS version's limit of 99. The Super Nintendo port greatly limits your ability to change weapons. Once you pick up a machine gun, for example, you can't go back to the pistol. Likewise, the chain gun, there's no going back. You're basically limited to switching between the different weapon types, bullets, fire, or rockets. There is still a knife in the game, but you only switch to it automatically when you're completely out of ammunition. But wait, you might ask, what if I wanted to sneak up behind a guard and quietly stab him in the back like I could in the DOS version? No and no, you can't switch to the knife at will, and the guards never turn their backs. Every enemy is always facing you. You don't have the frames of animation which include enemies from different angles. It's an aspect of the DOS version that is greatly missing here on the Super Nintendo. But if it's any consolation, the SNES version adds a map, which greatly helps you navigate the maze-like levels, and your avatar's picture at the bottom of the screen will turn to face whichever direction is dealing damage. Those can be helpful. There are also mission briefing screens in this version, which are arguably not as helpful. I mentioned Doom briefly, and that's by design. I'm covering Doom in the next episode, and we'll continue the id Software story from there. But suffice it to say that Doom came out and was a massive success on the order of $100,000 per day instead of $100,000 per month with Wolfenstein. So Atari contracted with id Software to provide Doom for the Jaguar to the tune of $250,000. While Carmack was working on this port, he did enjoy doing ports since they had new hardware to learn and new challenges to overcome. He got to thinking about how the Jaguar hardware could handle other games too, so one afternoon on a whim, he started porting Wolfenstein 3D. It sounds like he worked overnight, and when people were starting to come into the office the next day, he had the functional part of the Super Nintendo port up and running on the Jaguar. They showed this to Atari, and Atari was okay with delaying Doom for a little while to work on Wolfenstein instead. They gave the game 4 times the resolution of the PC version, 3 times the audio sampling rate, and a solid 30 frames per second in full screen. Oh, and of course, undoing all the content censorship stripped from the SNES port at Nintendo's behest. Atari showed off a very early version of Wolfenstein 3D on the Jaguar in April of 1994 at the European Computer Trade Show, ECTS, in London. It was still using low-resolution graphics in 256 colors, according to Loic Duval, who reported on this for Atari Explorer Online. He said that it was running at 60 frames per second, which was too fast. At the Bay Area DevCon, a little while later, the updated graphics were in place, and the game was intentionally slowed down to 30 frames per second, according to both Tim Wilson and Mike Fulton. There's more about the frame rate in a developer's commentary-style playthrough captured in a video version of the Bethesda podcast for the game's 20th anniversary, the PC version of the game's 20th anniversary. In the first level, the first large room you come to on the Jaguar version, John Carmack was getting 60 frames per second. This was unheard of at this time with 3D graphics. The PC version was mostly in the teens, but he couldn't maintain 60 frames per second throughout the game, so he capped the Jaguar version at 30. Jagosaurus on Atari Age let me know about this video, and I'll be referencing it here more as I go along, so thank you Jagosaurus for the tip. That was very helpful. And the video itself is a cool overview of the game's development and a lot of other little inside details from Mr. Carmack. There will be a link to the video in the show notes. The textures are 128 by 128 pixels. That's bigger than the entire screen resolution on the Super Nintendo version. And at this resolution, you can get right up next to the walls without major pixelation. The weapon graphics were redrawn and look a whole lot like those in Doom, far more detail than in DOS Wolfenstein. The game runs at full screen, there's no bar at the bottom, and from what I can tell, this is the only port of Wolfenstein 3D to run at full screen. Well, the iOS port kinda does, but you still have non-transparent blocks around the screen, not to mention your non-transparent fingers. In the Jaguar version, health, ammo, keys, and your avatar's face are all overlaid with transparent blocking near the bottom of the screen. There's the ability to save your game on any level rather than relying on a password system, and the music is largely the same as the DOS version but with better wavetable synthesis. Unlike other Wolfenstein 3D ports, there is no high score here. You might ask why you would want to pick up treasure if it doesn't add to your score.
Why would you want to pick up treasure if not to add to your score?
Thank you, Bishop. I'm glad you asked. Picking up treasure adds 4 percentage points to your health. Plus, it adds to your completion percentage at the end of the level. Another difference with the Jaguar version is that there is no concept of lives. You don't have a set number of lives. John Carmack said that having lives in the game is kind of a holdover from arcade games. But, you're not playing at an arcade, you're playing to just have fun, and so there's no limited number of lives in Doom or in the Jaguar port of Wolfenstein 3D. But other than these changes, the game is a whole lot like the Super Nintendo version. Same story, same weapons, same inability to switch back to the pistol or machine gun once you have a higher power bullet flinger. Same one-dimensional enemy sprites. Some of the sampled voices are new, some carry over from the SNES version. I'll go over all of this in more detail a little later. Wolfenstein 3D on the Jaguar entered production on Monday, June 20th, and shipped to stores at the beginning of August 1994. You are Allied Operative William J. or B.J. Blazkowicz, a one-man strike team who reports directly to President Roosevelt.
Is that Teddy or Franklin?
Oh, sorry, Franklin, FDR. You, Blazkowicz, are known for taking on perilous and important missions, getting in, getting the job done, and getting out alive. The game is played from a first-person perspective, staring down the barrel of whatever weapon you might be holding, unless it's a knife, because that doesn't have a barrel. You take out enemies, collect treasure, find keys to unlock doors, and optionally search for secret rooms. You start off with 2 weapons, a pistol and a knife. You can only use the latter when you're out of ammunition, which is initially 25 rounds, or 50 rounds in the easy skill level. The pistol has a relatively slow rate of fire, but is better than having to use the knife. You may eventually find a fully automatic machine gun. I don't know the make or model, but it doesn't matter too much because it can do this. Oh yeah, that's much better than the pistol, which you presumably toss aside because you won't be able to use it anymore. Well, unless you die, at which point you start the level over with a pistol and knife. The machine gun comes with 10 additional rounds of ammo when you pick one up. I should note that with all the bullet-firing weapons, accuracy decreases with range. That's true for both you and the enemies. One big step up from the machine gun is the chain gun, which has 6 rotating barrels for maximum firepower. Unlike the machine gun, you can't squeeze off a single round, the minimum here is 2. Once you grab this shiny spinning machine of death, you presumably toss aside the machine gun. You also get 10 extra rounds of ammo. There is Wolfenstein, the flamethrower.
Bet kids love this one.
It launches out puffs of fire, a minimum of 2 at a time, which fly across the screen, dealing damage to enemies, but not actually setting them on fire. You might think of this more like the plasma gun from Doom. The flame balls travel at just about the same speed as you can run, so given a long enough hallway you can catch up, but you can't hurt yourself. No self-immolation here. The flamethrower comes with 20 units, 20 balls of fire when you pick one up, and like the chain gun, you can't shoot off a single puff of fire. The minimum is 2. And finally, the rocket launcher. It's like the flamethrower, but faster. There's no splash damage, so you can't hurt yourself by shooting the wall right in front of you. It's just a very powerful projectile. When you pick up a rocket launcher, you get 9 rockets. Now, with both of these weapons, the flamethrower and the rocket launcher, they can pass through lesser enemies until hitting a wall, maybe several if you can line them up. It's kind of like that quick scene in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade taking out a line of Nazis with a single shot. Bigger enemies, bosses and mutants and usually SS, might take a couple of flame puffs and keep on coming, but mutants and SS typically don't survive a rocket. You will be using all these weapons to take down Nazis.
Nazis. I hate these guys.
These include the all-purpose soldiers, which in a throwback to the original Castle Wolfenstein say Achtung! Achtung! When your presence is detected. Some will first notice you when you walk into the room or past the little cubby where they're stationed. Some will hear gunfire and run to investigate. Their rate of fire is fairly low. Taking them out requires 1 to 4 bullets, and they drop a pistol magazine with 10 rounds when they fall. Stepping up from the foot soldiers are the SS, or Schutzstaffel. They're bigger, badder, burlier, and bluer than the regular guards, and armed with a machine gun. They require 5 to 7 bullets to kill, and drop their machine gun. If you don't have one already, you get the weapon plus 6 rounds of ammunition. Speaking of Schutzstaffel, there are officers who yell out, Schutzstaffel! So, these two guys announcing their police organization when you enter the room. I can't speak for everybody, but I, too, always announce my occupation when a gun-toting stranger walks through my door. Software engineer! Anyway, the officer wears a white uniform with shiny black boots, carries a pistol, and is both faster in motion and quicker on the draw than the other Nazis. They're not very tough, but as I said, they're fast. The Nazis trained attack dogs, German Shepherds, and you'll find these in certain rooms or corridors. They don't want to play, they want to attack you. You've got no choice but to put them down. Every time I have to shoot a dog in this game, it makes me hate the Nazis more. Later in the game, you'll encounter mutants, undead super soldier zombies with a pistol embedded in their chests. They don't announce their occupation.
Zombie! Bad guy! Hi, zombie.
Yeah, they don't do that or make any other noise when they see you, which gives them a measure of stealth. You might not notice them until they start shooting you. These guys dual-wield meat cleavers, though it seems to be mostly for intimidation. When they get up close, they're still happy to continue shooting. See, don't they look happy? These guys are pretty dangerous, so given the choice of enemies in the room, you may want to target mutants first. One interesting note about the mutants is that they are often accompanied by dogs. This is because in the Super Nintendo version, there were no dogs, only giant mutated rats. So of course all the mutants will be sticking together. Enemy placement here carried over from the Super Nintendo. So while it doesn't really make sense with dogs and mutants, that's why they stick together here. Now we come to the bosses. There are 6 in this game, each one bossier than the last. Hans Gross wears a buzz cut, blue armor, and wields 2 chain guns.
Coming for you!
Trans Gross has green armor with shoulder spikes and also sports twin chain guns. He actually originated in the Spear of Destiny game and makes a reappearance here.
Coming for you!
Dr. Schaub's wears no armor, just his white lab scrubs, but has a tremendous number of hit points and evil behind those highly reflective glasses. He flings syringes at you, which work like rockets and explode on impact. Oh, and he has his army of the undead and some attack dogs to help him out.
Coming for you!
The Uber Mutant has 4 arms, a chain gun in his chest, and a brown jumpsuit, which is custom tailored, I'm guessing. He doesn't seem to make any sound other than the whole shooting you thing. The Death Knight is a dude in a metal suit, like Iron Man, but without the full face mask or the charm. He too has a pair of chain guns, and if that's not enough, he also has a pair of shoulder-mounted rocket launchers, like Iron Soldier, but without the tank stomping ability. He's also surrounded by some Nazi cronies.
Guten Tag!
If this guy looks familiar, you may have first encountered him atop Castle Nuremberg in the Spear of Destiny game. And finally, Adolf Hitler himself. I'm going to save that for later. Enemies are stationary and inactive until triggered, and they can be triggered either by sight, they see you coming, or by sound, gunfire, and they come running in from other rooms. There are no patrols, and there's no sneaking up on a soldier because this game only ever shows enemies from the front, in a departure from the DOS version, but consistent with subsequent versions of this game on the Macintosh and 3DO. You can sometimes come across an enemy that can't quite see you yet. You see their elbow, but not their face. They're frozen in one frame of the walking animation. You can shoot them, and that'll act as a trigger too. Taking damage is a trigger. Unlike many modern first-person shooter games, enemies do not disappear when defeated. Their bodies will remain on the floor until you finish the level. This is a conscious decision on id's part, consistent with the Commander Keen games, as if to convey, in at least some small measure, how much damage you've truly done in this game. There are a number of things that you can pick up to help you in your missions. First, ammunition. This can be in magazines with 10 rounds or ammo boxes with 40 rounds. You can get additional rounds, as I've said, from fallen soldiers or by picking up weapons. There are fuel cans which provide 14 units for the flamethrower, and rocket crates which carry 9 rockets. You can also find backpacks in the game. These will increase the maximum number of rounds that you can hold from 150 to 250 for the first backpack, and 350 maximum with the second. You don't get any ammo with a backpack, just the extra carrying capacity. Your health starts at 100. I won't call this a percentage, 100%, but we'll probably refer to it as points, like hit points, throughout this episode. It probably won't stay 100 for very long, so there are several ways to replenish health in this game. There are med kits, first aid kits, which look like small cases with the red cross on the top. These add 25 points to your health. Dinners, delicious turkey dinners with a turkey leg, mashed potatoes, and peas. Those are good for 10 points. And if you're getting desperate, dog food will give you 4 points. You can't go above 100 health points with these items, so in that respect, these are like percentage points. But then we move on to treasure. Nazis looted treasure wherever they could, and golden crosses, chalices, crowns, and treasure chests can be found throughout the castles. These have some sort of mystical healing effect on them because when you pick them up, it adds 4 health points. With these magical golden trinkets, you can go above 100 health points, all the way up to and maybe even a little over 200. I've seen mention that this can go all the way up to 400, but I wasn't able to pull that one off. I could only get up to 203, which still has you feeling pretty good. You will encounter locked doors that remain locked no matter how much you wiggle the handle. There are 2 types of keys that will open locked doors, a gold key and a blue key, and you can tell which one is which by looking at the lock on the door. Pick up the key, and you'll be able to unlock the door and open it just like any other door. There may be multiple locked doors of the same color in a level, and you keep your key throughout the level. It's not like Gauntlet where you use up a key per door, but you can't carry keys between levels. The last item in the game is a 1-up, a blue sphere with a picture of your face on it. You may recall that I mentioned that the Jaguar version has no concept of lives, so what good is a 1-up? Well, the 1-up here gives you 200 health. That sounds awesome, but if you have over 200, it'll actually drop you down to 200. In some ports of the game, it gives you extra ammo as well, but in the Jaguar version, it's just the 200 health. So I mentioned doors. There are lots of doors. You can close them manually, or they'll close on their own after 4 seconds. They will not close, however, if there is a body in the doorway, so keep that in mind if you're seeking cover. There are also secret doors, known as push walls. These can be anywhere in a level, a conspicuous banner along an otherwise unadorned wall, or just an ordinary wall. If you find one, the wall will push back, revealing a hidden area which usually contains health, treasure, or munitions, but can contain soldiers and open up large sections of the level. There are often secret doors within secret doors, and that's typically where you find the good stuff like 1-ups or massive weapons. John Carmack initially resisted the idea of push walls because it was kind of an ugly hack in the code, and he wasn't happy about that. But after significant pressure from Romero and the others, he eventually added them, and as a result, I and countless others spent a non-trivial amount of time sliding along the walls, tapping the open door button. Wolfenstein 3D on the Atari Jaguar follows Blazkowicz on 6 different missions. Each mission can contain between 3 and 5 levels, and there are a couple of secret levels as well. Mission 1 is Dresden Strike. You were sent into Nazi Germany to eliminate Hitler's evil and massive henchman Hans Gross in his castle outside of Dresden, but got yourself detained, nabbed, maybe even captured, and thrown into a prison cell. Fortunately, you're kinda massive yourself, so you overpower the cell guard, take his pistol and knife, and set out to complete your mission, take out Hans Gross, and maybe find out some information on that mysterious Operation Eisenfaust that the Nazis are rumored to be conducting. There are 3 levels in this mission, with Hans all by himself in the 3rd level. Take him out, get his key, and take the elevator out of the castle. Mission 2 is called A Dark Secret. In this mission, you need to destroy the chemical weapons being developed in Castle Erlangen, with its moss-lined stone walls and majestic perch atop a cloudy mountain. Not that you'll be taking in the view, you're on the inside and there are no windows. The SS Commandant here is Trans Gross, Hans's older brother. Hans and Trans. I'm not going to make the obvious reference here to a recurring Saturday Night Live sketch of this similar name, that'd be too easy. But actually, the official Jaguar Gamer's Guide does go there. Says the sketch was back when SNL was funny. I use that phrase myself to this day. Anyway, Trans Gross has created a full line of chemical weapons, which is in clear violation of the 1925 Geneva Protocol, and you'll find this guy up on level 4 of this castle. Mission 3 is Operation Eisenfaust. Hey, remember way back in Mission 1 where I mentioned Operation Eisenfaust? Well, now you get to learn what that was all about. Dr. Schaubs has developed a corpsokinetic serum and grafted guns into the chests of his slightly deceased test subjects. Got a good deal on several hundred meat cleavers from Costco, and now is when you get to experience these guys in action firsthand. Mission 3 has 4 levels, officially, but there is also a bonus level here, using a secret elevator found in level 1. After you finish the bonus level, which honestly is a lot of fun, you resume your mission at level 2. Mission 4 is Trail of the Madman. You head off to East Prussia to a mountain fortress which plays host to Hitler's war room. You're looking for the war plans of Hitler's general staff, specifically the location of a secret base where they're amassing soldiers and weapons, especially Trans's chemical weapons. Guarding these plans is the fearsome Ubermutant, whom you'll find on level 5. Mission 5 is called Confrontation. Assuming you finished Mission 4 successfully, the map of the secret base has led you to Castle Heidenheim, where you must confront the armor-wearing Death Knight, who is up on the 6th level. Only by taking out the Death Knight can you stop the release of these chemical weapons. Mission 6 is Hitler's Last Stand. Enter the game's namesake castle, Castle Wolfenstein, for an ultimate showdown with the mini-mustachioed menace himself, Adolf Hitler. But first you need to fight through 5 levels of the Third Reich's finest. 6 if you count the bonus level found by taking a hidden elevator on level 3. On level 6, there he is, wearing a full armor mech suit and sporting 4 chain guns. Hitler is definitely not happy with your meddling. After a sarcastic greeting, he starts coming after you, stomping around like he owns the place.
Guten Tag!
But if you're able to defeat Mecha Hitler, what then? Well, my friends, we visit Castle Spoilerstein. Bishop, activate spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. If you wish to avoid spoilers, skip ahead 2 minutes 1 second on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark.
Wait, you think that's it? You think you can just take out Mecha Hitler and win the game? Not so. Hitler is more diabolical than both the Emperor and Dolores Umbridge combined. Destroying Mecha Hitler is just the first stage. He jumps out of his busted metal suit and comes at you full tilt, sporting a pair of chain guns and a snarl that'd make a Balrog tremble. But if you're still able to defeat him, let's say you are because I'm all out of movie references, you win the game. You get the usual briefing screen background and this text. Directly because of you, now millions of human beings are alive who would otherwise be dead. Because of you, the most terrible war in history has been won. By us. The world owes you a debt that it can never repay. Nations not yet born will laud the deeds you have performed this last month. Thank you, William J. Blaskowitz. You are indeed a hero for the ages. Fortunately, I did not attempt my FDR impersonation for that text. Then you get to meet the cast. In front of the title screen background, you see each of the enemies you encounter in the game in a walking animation with their name at the bottom. You have the Guard, Officer, SS, Mutant, Guard Dog, Dr. Schaubs, though the picture is of Hans Gross. Then comes Hans Gross, though the picture is of Trans Gross. Then Trans Gross, but the picture is of Dr. Schaubs. Whew, did none of the playtesters catch this? After these 3 misnamed bosses, you have the Uber Mutant, Death Knight, Mecha Hitler, and Hitler. It'll automatically cycle between these, starting over from the beginning, and you can move through them manually using the D-pad. Hit the Option button to get out, and you'll get the id Software credits. Programmers John Carmack, John Romero, Dave Taylor, and Sean Green. Artists Adrian Carmack and Kevin Cloud. Designer Sandy Peterson. Biz Jay Wilbur. Software support Sean Green and American McGee. And music and sound effects Robert Prince. I don't usually read off the full credits, but it's a small team, and I feel like I've learned so much about them in the developer history section. From this point, the only thing you can do is reset the Jaguar.
End of spoilers. The remainder of this episode is free of spoilers, but not necessarily free of unexpected movie references.
Controlling BJ Blazkowicz through his Nazi blasting missions uses the Jaguar controller, a lot like the one that I have here. The directional pad up or down will move forward or backward, left or right to turn in those directions. If you hold down the A button, you move faster. This game already moves at a speedy clip without the A button, so you might think, why would I need to actually run? Ask me again when you're pursued by Dr. Schaubs and in desperate need of health and ammo. Speaking of ammo, you unleash it with the B button. Holding it down gives you continuous fire. You can cycle between weapons with the Option button. Well, kind of. As I said, you can never switch to the knife. That happens automatically when you run out of ammo, and you can't switch between the pistol, machine gun, or chain gun. The more powerful ones serve as replacements. You cannot switch to weapons that you haven't picked up yet or for which you have no ammunition. That last part is pretty self-explanatory. The C button does 2 things. It opens doors and it lets you strafe. When I first played Wolfenstein 3D at the age of 16 or so, I didn't know what they meant by strafing, but it was also called sidestepping, and the Jaguar manual calls it sliding. Holding the C button and left and right on the D-pad will move you sideways without turning. You can combine this with the A button for speed strafing, and if you're nimble or polydactyl, you can do all this and shoot at the same time. Strafing is great for peering around corners without, running into a hallway and then turning to see if any guards have drawn their weapons. Strafing through doorways can be a little tricky because the C button also closes doors, but if you kind of wedge yourself into the doorway a little bit before hitting C, the door won't close on you. Let's talk pause button. Everybody loves a good pause button. When you pause the game, the word paused appears at the top of the screen, and if you hit A, you can adjust the music volume by moving a slider left or right. You can hit the B button to adjust the sound effects volume. You hear the current music volume level when you're adjusting either slider, and you hear a gunshot to gauge the current sound effects level when adjusting that one. If you hit the C button while paused, it'll do absolutely nothing. Well, nothing except for making a little button tapping sound. That. If you hit 1 and 3 on the keypad, you can hide the paused graphic and deactivate the volume controls. The keypad is used in this game and comes with an overlay. The overlay is black with red buttons and several drops of blood added for effect. So if you buy this game used, no, the previous owner didn't have a nosebleed all over the controller while playing this game. Well, probably. The buttons at the top, 1, 2, and 3, are the save game slots. Saving the game stores your current mission and level number, health, ammo, weapons, and difficulty setting that you were playing, so you can pick up from there later. It does not store anything about enemy or item positions on the level, so it's not like a quick save on a computer where it behaves like a complete snapshot of the game in progress, so I would recommend using a save game slot at the start of a level when you're in a good position, health or ammo-wise. The number 5 on the keypad activates the auto map. The auto map is a lifesaver, or at least a sanity saver. It only shows what you've encountered in the game, so it builds as you go, making it easier to see where you haven't been. Your position is represented by a green arrow, and the map shows all the textures and doors, but from an overhead view. You can pan around the map with the D-pad, or hit a button to exit. Viewing the map will protect you from enemy fire, but the time counter keeps on ticking, so it's not a pause. Another thing about the map is it's good for figuring out where secret doors might be. Is there any space for a secret room behind this wall? If not, don't bother searching there. At the bottom of the overlay, it indicates that star and pound reset the game, and that the 0 key will toggle the music, but that's not entirely true. Yeah, it'll turn off the music, but it'll turn off the sound effects as well. It's basically a mute button, turning on or off all the sounds in the game. Volume levels, control configuration, difficulty level, and the saved games are stored in cartridge memory, which is rated for 100,000 updates. If you want to reset cartridge memory to defaults, the magic key combination for that is star option pound, which you enter on the main menu. It'll say cartridge memory cleared. When you first boot up Wolfenstein 3D on the Atari Jaguar, you see a rotating sphere with various images texture mapped to it in a checkerboard type of fashion. These images include the id Software logo, the Atari logo, Hitler in the crosshairs, and B.J. Blazkowicz holding up a pistol, looking all intimidating. There's a 1994 copyright at the bottom from id Software licensed to Atari Corp. After about 10 seconds, or if you hit a button, you get the title screen, which features the box art in the background, Wolfenstein 3D in a fancy red font, and the copyright text still at the bottom. If you wait 10 more seconds, you get the id Software credits, which is yellow text on a very dark version of the box art background. After about 10 more seconds, you get a demo. There are 3 different demos that it'll play, and it shows a rather adept player going through levels 1-1, 3-1, and 6-1. In between the demos, you'll get the title screen, credits screen, or spinning sphere for a few seconds. These also cycle through. And only the sphere has the background music, the others are silent. While the demo is playing, you can toggle the sound with the 0 button and actually pause the demo with the pause button. You can access the volume sliders while the demo is paused, and this does a very curious thing. It affects the movement timing, so the demo player goes from efficiently moving through a level gunning down Nazis to running into walls and shooting at nothing in particular. I find that kind of amusing, messing with the demo like that. Maybe I'm just easily entertained. Hit a button to stop the attract mode, and the music for the current demo level may play into the menu. The main menu is a single screen containing everything that you need to configure and start or load a game. The currently selected option has a spinning gold 5-point star next to it. At the top is Start, and you can move the D-pad to the right to choose between New Game, which is the default, Last Game, which loads the most recent saved game, and then the 3 individual saved games, 1, 2, and 3, if those slots have been used. Below that is the difficulty. The options are Easy, Normal, Extra Carnage, and Maximum Death. Easy stands out by being shown in a green font, Maximum Death in red. A few things happen when you move to a higher difficulty. Enemy fire only does half the damage on Easy, And as you go up in difficulty, enemies require more hits, there are more enemies, and you get hurt more easily. I'm told that some of the treasure is transformed to enemies in maximum death mode, and this is done at random. I didn't test this out specifically, so I can't say for sure if it's true, but a couple good sources indicate that it is, so I'll defer to them. Finally, on the main menu is the option to customize the controls, where you can cycle between the 6 different button combinations. On this menu, the Start option is the only one that will wrap around to the beginning when you reach the end of the possible selections. The other two will not. Hitting a button anywhere on the screen will start the game as configured. If you're starting a game from the first level of a new mission, you get the mission briefing. Here, B.J. Blazkowicz is in the Oval Office, as President Franklin Roosevelt looks down at some document. The top of the screen says Mission Briefing in a blue font, and the briefing itself, 2 or 3 paragraphs, scrolls up from the bottom in a smaller white font. In the background plays the song entitled POW, Prisoner of War, which is notable for having maudlin snippets of the hymns for branches of the American Armed Forces, including, in order, the Marines hymn, The Army Goes Rolling Along, Anchors Away, and the Air Force song. Yeah, the Air Force didn't technically exist as a separate branch during World War II, but the Army Air Force used the same song, so it's all good. No love for the US Coast Guard, though. Hit a button to exit the briefing. Now, if you've played Wolfenstein 3D on other platforms, you may expect a loading screen to pop up saying, "Get psyched," before you can actually start playing. There's no time to get psyched. On the Jaguar version, it loads up too quickly to need a loading screen, and before you know it, you're staring down the barrel of your current weapon. In the bottom left corner is your face. It looks around constantly, lots of eyebrow action there, and is a visual indication of your damage, growing more bloodied as your health decreases. You also get a devious grin when you pick up a new weapon, something that's absent in the DOS version that I miss when I go back to that version. To the right of the glancing, grinning, occasionally gory face of B.J. Blazkowicz, you see a numeric counter of your health, starting at 100 on a new game. In the very center of the screen is your current weapon. Looks like you're left-handed with how you're holding the pistol. To the right is your ammo count for that weapon, with an icon indicating the type of ammo in the bottom right corner. A centerfire cartridge, an oil can, or a rocket. All this is overlaid with transparent edges, so the numbers and icons seem to float over the action. Again, this seems to be the only port of Wolfenstein that does this. If you have the blue key, it's displayed to the right of the health counter. If you have the gold key, it's shown to the left of the ammo counter. When you're hit, BJ's face in the corner will look in the direction of the attacker, and the screen will turn red. If you're killed, you'll get a dramatic sound, and your view turns to face the enemy who fired the fatal shot. If you don't die and reach the elevator at the end of a level, you get a summary screen. This screen shows the mission number and floor number, the amount of time it took for you to complete the level, and the par time for the level, which serves as kind of a baseline for getting through the level quickly. If you're taking your time and exploring the level thoroughly, you're going to be way above par. If you fly through guns blazing and know where you're going, then that par time is probably doable. In the top right corner of the summary screen is B.J. Blazkowicz from the waist up, breathing heavily with his handgun pointed upward while the stats are being loaded and displayed. There are 3 counters at the bottom of the screen, percentages, tracking enemy, treasure, and secret. It's a measure of how thoroughly you cleared that level. If you get 100% for all 3, the word perfect is shown at the bottom of the screen, and BJ will give you an enthusiastic thumbs up. Hit a button when you're done with the summary screen and ready to go to the next level. If you hit the 5 key on the keypad during a level to load the map, it'll show the mission and floor numbers at the top. Hitting 5 again, or any fire button or pause, will exit the map and return to the game. As I mentioned before, while you're looking at the map, enemies can't hurt you, but you will be adding to your level time. pseudo-3D environment of Wolfenstein 3D is generated using a technique called ray casting that turns a simple grid-based floor map into a 3D projection by tracing rays from the player's viewpoint in vertical columns. So let's say you're Geordie LaForge, and you've got that visor with a vertical, whatever those things are called, the vertical tines, and the visor is casting out rays of light between each tine. Where that ray would intersect with part of the map is what would be shown on the screen. It's a much quicker way of rendering a 3D-like scene than its big brother, ray tracing. I put a link in the show notes describing ray casting in more detail if my description is lacking. The floors and ceiling are rendered in flat colors, brown or gray respectively, and the wall textures are typically stone or wood or brick or metal. There's quite a variety here, and many of the textures include adornments like pictures or banners or moss. Heavy on the swastikas. There are lights on the ceiling, either green single bulb lamps or chandeliers, but unlike the PC and SNES versions, do not have a corresponding pool of light on the floor. The Mac 3DO and some other versions also lack the pool of light. All the wall edges are at 90 or 180 degrees to each other, and all the ceilings have the same height. There are vases and potted plants, and down in the dungeons you'll have cages and piles of bones and cell bars and water wells. Most of these objects cast shadows, or at least have the appearance of shadow. There is no correlation with light source in the room. Unlike the PC and SNES versions with their 8-bit color depth, 256 colors, the Jaguar port uses 16-bit color, that's 65,536 colors, give or take. Subsequent ports to the Macintosh and 3DO use the same high-color sprites as the Jaguar version. The music is done in MIDI with a custom instrument patch set. It uses many of the original DOS version songs, though the DOS version used ad-lib FM synthesis and therefore doesn't sound quite as realistic. Here, let's take a listen. This is the music from the first level of the DOS version. This was captured directly from a Sound Blaster or compatible sound card on a computer running Wolfenstein 3D under MS-DOS. Here's the Super Nintendo version for comparison. And now the Jaguar version of the same audio clip. Later there was a Game Boy Advance release of Wolfenstein, and here's what that sounded like. So if you're getting sick of that song by now, I've got good news. The 3DO and Mac versions use entirely different soundtracks. This is level 1 on the 3DO. And I'm pretty sure this is level 1 on the Mac. In terms of the number of songs per Wolfenstein 3D port, the DOS version has the most by far with 27, then comes Game Boy Advance with 19, the Jaguar with 15, SNES with 12, though one of those was never used in the game, the 3DO had 9, and the Macintosh 7. Personally, I prefer the Bobby Prince music over the 3DO and Macintosh soundtracks, but if you wanted the best of both worlds, the original music with a full orchestral score, check this out. A musician named Rich Douglas recorded a cinematic reimagining of the original score and released it on CD, 14 tracks in all. I can't help but smile when listening to this. There's a link to the remix in the show notes. There are a lot of sampled sounds in this game, many of which you've heard already, and they're very conveniently presented in stereo, so when you walk into a room you can tell from which direction you were spotted. Many of these sounds carried over from the Super Nintendo port. Not all, of course. The dogs and German speech were added back in. A cool thing that Wolfenstein 3D does is alter the pitch of the voices so that it sounds like it's different people. They all still say the same thing, but it adds a little variety to the Nazis that you're gunning down. There are several cheat codes in Wolfenstein 3D for the Jaguar. First and most importantly, the music test. When you see the spinning sphere when the game first starts up, press the pound key on the keypad. You'll be given a text-only menu which says Select Song at the top, and then a list of 15 songs by name. Well, kind of. There's a 0 at the beginning and an F at the end of each name, and for the most part the names are highly abbreviated. Here are the full names of the songs in menu order. Gimme Fanfare, that's the between-level music. POW, that's the briefing screen. Tiptoeing Around, that's the intro theme when you first turn on the game. Searching for the Enemy, Suspense, The Tower, Funky Colonel Bill, The Nazi Rap, Jazzin' Them Nazis, Death to the Nazis, Get Them Before They Get You, that's what I've been calling the level 1 music, it's reused in other levels of course. The SS Gonna Get You, Going After Hitler, The Ultimate Challenge, and Evil Incarnate. You use the D-pad to move an asterisk to the song that you want to play, hit A, B, or C to play the song, and star and pound to reset the game and get out of there. Next code is the level select. From the main menu, hold down 1, 3, 7, and 9 on the keypad. You'll be presented with two options, mission and level. This is on a very dark version of the box art background. Use the D-pad up or down to move the spinning gold star of selection to either option, and left or right to scroll through the mission and level numbers. Mission goes from 1 to 6, and level goes from 1 to 7. If you select an impossible combination, say Mission 1 Level 6, then you'll go to the first level of the next mission. When you're in a level and viewing the map, you can skip to the next level or move back to the previous level by entering the codes 4786 or 4696, respectively. Before switching to the next or previous level, you get the level summary screen, just as if you found the elevator. To give yourself both keys, all weapons, and excessive amounts of ammo, 999 units of each, which is way more than you can normally get in the game, enter the code 4996 at any point in a level. To make yourself totally invulnerable, God mode as it were, that code is 4668. BJ's face in the corner will get a devious grin, glowing eyes, and a low-fitting halo. You can enter the same code again to deactivate God mode. He'll still grin for a short time as the intoxicating power wears off. There's one other code, 4887, which displays several refresh timings on the screen. Probably not helpful to you in any way, but there it is. The box art for Wolfenstein 3D features artwork that I've been referencing but haven't actually described yet. It shows a shirtless, muscle-bound man holding some sort of massive rifle that doesn't quite look like anything in the game. He has a red bandana wrapped around his left wrist because wearing one around your head is a little too Rambo-esque. He's shooting up in the air and has just kicked an enemy soldier in the chest, causing him to fall backward toward the viewer. This soldier has no rank or insignia on his uniform and is sporting a rifle that looks a whole lot like an American M16, which is inaccurate and anachronistic here. Another enemy soldier is rushing in to his comrade's aid from the background. This box art was used for other releases of Wolfenstein 3D. I've seen it used on subsequent copies and compilations of the DOS version. The id Software logo is featured above the Atari logo on the left, and the screenshot shows you taking on Hans Gross with a pistol. Good luck with that. On the back of the box are 4 more screenshots, taking down a guard with a flamethrower, experiencing death by mutant and officer at the same time, taking on the Uber mutant with a rocket launcher, and a large number of Nazi SS and officers on the floor, presumably mowed down by your chaingun. The headline on the back says, "Bring down the Third Reich," and here is the single language text that follows. As the legendary William J. B.J. Blazkowicz, you've been commissioned to rewrite history in a bloody 64-bit war filled with enough Nazi scum to keep you trigger-happy for weeks. Annihilate Der Fuhrer's elite commando team, assassinate the diabolical Dr. Schaubs, capture the secret war plans, infiltrate Der Fuhrer's bunker, and waste anyone and anything that gets in your way. Oh, there are bullet points. It's been a while since I've read off bullet points. Graphic 64-bit carnage, Jaguar style. Realistic bullets, realistic blood, real 3D action. 6 missions with 30 levels of bullet-ridden mayhem. Unlimited character movement in a virtual war zone. Load up on ammo packs, keys, booty, and a truly incredible arsenal. Find and use flamethrowers, chain guns, and rocket launchers. Waste SS guards, mad scientists, German shepherds, and mutant experiments. Save feature allows you to save your progress at each level. In the bottom right corner is a yellow box indicating graphic violence, as if that description didn't clue you in already. The manual is a 24-page stapled monochrome booklet. It includes the story, mission summaries, button layout, screen layout, scale copy of the overlay, the usual. It does contain some hints, which I will read off here. Every level has hidden stuff. Not only could you use all those power-up items, but you can get a nice bonus for finding them all too. I guess the bonus would be the thumbs up from BJ on the summary screen. Your captors may be rude hosts, but they would never hide anything that would be necessary to escape. Keys and elevators can always be reached through non-hidden passages. Push walls are usually in alcoves, corners, or the ends of hallways, but not always. The doors and walls are not completely soundproof. Firing your weapon is likely to bring nearby guards running toward you. Don't stand in the doorway with the guards in the room beyond. If you do, they can easily sneak up from the side and shoot you. The closer you are, the more damage you can inflict. The official Jaguar Gamer's Guide has a section on Wolfenstein. It contains maps for each level with all the secrets exposed, a list of all weapons, one-ups, and secrets in each level. It has tips for fighting the bosses, as well as some general hints, which largely duplicate what's already in the manual, but more explicitly states how to lure enemies to your waiting weapon. Just walk into a room, fire off a round or two, back up, and wait for the cannon fodder. A useful hint in the Jaguar Gamer's Guide is to not waste first aid kits. If you're within a few points of 100, you won't get the full effect from these 25-point kits, so maybe hold them off for later. Also, if you come across a cache of treasures and medkits, go for the medkits first to get you 100, and then the treasure to get you above 100. Reviews of this game around the time of release were generally positive. Edge magazine in the UK reviewed this game in their September 1994 issue, giving it 7 out of 10. They say they can't believe Atari told id to delay Doom in order to release Wolfenstein, but say that the game is simple, addictive, and worryingly good fun. They say it has 10 levels, which is wrong, and they seem to indicate that your damage is only indicated by BJ's face in the corner. They compare it very favorably to the SNES version, but say that it feels too fast. They lament the lack of ceiling detail and say that the Jaguar joypad is cumbersome and difficult to aim. They close by saying that you'd have to be desperate to dash out and buy it, but Jaguar owners are desperate. GamePro magazine also had a review in their September 1994 issue, but is less cynical than Edge. They rate the game in several categories on a scale of 1 to 5, graphics 5, sound 4.5, control 4.5, and fun factor 5.0. They say it's the best Wolfenstein on any platform, including the PC. They also call the Jaguar controller cumbersome when comparing to the SNES controller, and I think that might be in reference to strafing. On the Super Nintendo, you can use the shoulder buttons to strafe, but there's no such functionality on the Jaguar. They say the graphics sizzle, being smooth, sharp, and detailed, crystal clear with minimal pixelization. The music adds spine-tingling atmosphere, and they like the digitized sounds. As is typical for GamePro, there are some pro tips here along with the review. Be sure to check the walls for secret passageways. The Gatling gun should be your weapon of choice. Not only is it quick and deadly, but ammo is readily available. When you open a door to a room filled with troops, stay outside the room, close the door, and let them come to you. They'll approach one by one, and you can easily shoot them. All the bosses are difficult to beat, and the best tactic is to hit and run. But before you go head-to-head with one of the mutants, be sure to find a stash of first aid kits and ammo. When you come up against several enemies, take out those with automatic weapons first, then the pistol-packing guards. With soldiers, first take out the ones in white uniforms, then wearing blue, then brown. Video Games and Computer Entertainment rated the game 9 out of 10, saying that this version is infinitely better than the SNES version and surprisingly better than the PC. The 4 reviewers of Electronic Gaming Monthly gave the game 3 7s and an 8 out of 10, saying that the game is a bit too fast. The 3 reviewers of Die Hard Game Fan gave the game 82%, 80%, and 82%. The French magazine Consoles gave the game 93% overall, calling the game a mega hit that would make you want to buy a Jaguar. Atari Explorer Online rated the game 8 out of 10 in September 1994, which dropped to 7 out of 10 a year later. Moby Games has 14 reviews, both modern and retro, with a high of 100% and a low of 60%, averaging 82% overall. Atari Age lists 5 external reviews, all modern, with a high of 90% and a low of 60%, for an average of 76%. Atari Age lists a rarity of 3 out of 10 for this game. On eBay, I've seen multiple loose cards selling for around $35 and complete without overlay for $45, and complete with overlay for $50 to $60, brand new for $108. Bravo Sierra Computers has it listed new for $70, Best Electronics loose for $30, and B&C Computer Visions looks like new for $60. 8-Bit Fix has a couple brand new for $70. If you wanted the original DOS version of Wolfenstein 3D, you can download it from Steam for $5. I actually just bought it a couple days ago. There was a 50% off sale going on, so $2.50. It says it's Windows only, and I don't usually have reason to boot into Windows, but I did to download this game from Steam, and then went into the Steam apps directory and copied the data files out of it. These can be used in DOSBox. There's a DOSBox config in there, but I just copied everything over to my old MS-DOS computer and ran the game there. I tried it out on my PlayStation TV, on which I just installed the recently released Henkaku homebrew enabler. It works, but without sound. I didn't check to see if that was a known limitation or if I did something wrong. There's also a cross-platform open-source port of the Wolfenstein engine in SDL, which you can use to play these data files on any number of platforms, Mac, Linux, Dreamcast. So if you want to play the original Wolfenstein, there are a lot of ways to do so legally. I'd like to touch a bit more on perhaps the chief competitor to the Jaguar, the 3DO port of Wolfenstein 3D. This was actually written by Rebecca Heinemann, Burger Bill from back then, who worked on the SNES version but couldn't release it. And there's a good interview with Heinemann on a recent episode of the Retro Hour podcast. I just learned about this podcast a few days ago, subscribed to it, and went through the episode list, saw this one. Sweet, Rebecca Heinemann interview. How the Retro Hour show works, if you're not familiar with it, is they talk about the news of the week. It's a weekly show. They talk about news for the first half hour, and then the second half is an interview with a gaming veteran. It's a good format, a tight ship, and I've listened to a few episodes now and enjoyed them all. There's a link to their show in the show notes if you're interested. But back to the 3DO version. What I like about the 3DO port is that in addition to the missions featured on the Jaguar version, it also includes the missions from the DOS version. So there are a huge number of total levels. 90-something, including the secret Pac-Man level with the indestructible ghosts from the DOS version. The Macintosh port is the same way. The 3DO port also has the original names for the difficulty levels, from Can I Play Daddy up through I Am Death Incarnate, though the graphics look creepy for the two highest skill levels. Not a good kind of creepy. Both 3DO and Mac are based off of the Jaguar version, have similar high-resolution textures, though oddly some of the weapons are different. The flamethrower doesn't look as cool as it does on the Jaguar, and on the 3DO at least they lack animation. The barrels on the chaingun don't rotate, for example. Both Mac and 3DO ports have a full opaque bar at the bottom of the screen showing lives, score, ammo, health, that sort of thing, so it doesn't really run in full screen like the Jaguar version, but you can work for points, which are completely absent on the Jaguar. The 3DO controller has shoulder buttons, and they're used to strafe in Wolfenstein 3D, which might be more convenient than the Jaguar version where you have to hold down the C button and move left or right on the D-pad to strafe. But on the 3DO, activating the map and changing weapons requires cording, pressing two buttons at the same time. So A is fire, B is open doors, and C is run. To cycle through weapons, you push B and C at the same time, repeatedly, to choose between weapons. To activate the map, you push A and C at the same time. The 3DO controller has an option and pause button in the center. The options button brings up the options menu, where you can set the volume or start a new game, and the pause button does just that. Looking at the Super Nintendo version, which has start and select buttons, start will show the map and presumably pause the game, though I can't say that for sure, and select will cycle through the weapons. The SNES version also has mouse support, which is kind of neat, but I've never really played Wolfenstein with a mouse. I think I'll talk more about that later. So I guess it's a personal preference how important the shoulder buttons are for strafing. Personally, I'm so used to playing Wolfenstein on a keyboard, holding down the Alt button to strafe, it seems perfectly natural moving to the Jaguar controller and holding down C to strafe, but that's me. The sounds in the 3DO and Macintosh versions are also rather different. I've already talked about the music, but there are different digitized sounds throughout, including additional German speech from the soldiers. I like the additional speech, but some of the sounds are, well, they're too much. Take the door opening sounds, please. Here's what opening doors sounds like in DOS with the Sound Blaster. Here's the equivalent sound on the Jaguar and on the 3DO. I'm not a fan of that, it's too heavy-handed to me. But what bothers me more is the sound when you take out an attack dog. On the Jaguar it sounds like this. DOS version is pretty much the same, but on the 3DO it's much more drawn out. I don't like that at all. It sounds like there's more suffering involved, and I find that very distasteful. So between the sounds like these and the original music, the 3DO port doesn't sound at all like Wolfenstein 3D to me. Your preference may differ, but I like the Jaguar version better because it has the original music and some of the original sounds. John Carmack said in the video Jagosaurus posted, the Bethesda video podcast interview, that the Jaguar version is his favorite version, but, well, I can't take that out of context here. Let's listen to the full audio for that.
The Jaguar version was probably my favorite because you had shoulder buttons to be able to move around on, so you get the strafing action more easily in there. It ran at a consistent frame rate. Things were a little bit crisper in some ways. So I had a lot of fun on that.
The Jaguar version did not allow strafing with his shoulder buttons. The Pro Controller wasn't even out at the time Wolfenstein 3D was released. But even if it was, the game does not support the shoulder buttons for strafing. He might be referring to the 3DO version, but he didn't work on that, so I don't know. I'll call this one inconclusive. He does conclusively say that he had fun playing the Jaguar version.
Yeah, going back, one of the funny things, or interesting at least, in the case of Wolfenstein and really all of our games to some degree, is that when we're actually making the games, I usually haven't thoroughly played through every level in the game during development. I'm all busy going through the same levels over and over again, working out problems, optimizing things. And I can remember during the Jaguar Wolfenstein development when I was all happy with it running at a nice 30 frames per second, good performance, and I was just saying, wow, this is really lots of fun. And, Romero gave me the kind of snarky comment about, yeah, it was lots of fun in the PC version too, you just didn't play that one that much.
So while I certainly can't speak for John Carmack, is the Jaguar port my favorite version of Wolfenstein 3D? I'll answer that question after the break. There was a shareware kiosk at the local mall in late 1992. They had several computers set up displaying some of the games that you could buy, shareware versions, and one of these computers was running Wolfenstein 3D. This game was mind-blowingly impressive. We'd never seen anything like it, and after playing it for a couple minutes, we bought a 5¼ floppy disk containing the shareware release, along with a couple other games that they had there, like Hugo's House of Horrors and Bob's Dragon Hunt. We didn't really get into Bob's Dragon Hunt, but played through Hugo all the way to the end. That was fun, though the end contained some trivia questions, and I had to call my friend Cert for one of them because he had read The Hobbit and I had not. But what got the most playtime, especially for me and my brother, was Wolfenstein 3D. My computer wasn't as fast as the one at the kiosk at the mall. I had a 25 MHz Packard Bell 386SX with 2 megabytes of memory. The one at the mall must have been 33 MHz or a DX. Huge difference back then. When you start up Wolfenstein 3D for DOS, you get 3 gauges for the available memory, and my computer barely eked out enough to play the game. I also needed to shrink the window a notch or two for it to run smoothly, but to play such a fast-paced 3D game at home was thoroughly addictive, though for the first time it made me think that my computer, which was really rather new since I had just bought it a couple months prior, needed upgrades. My strongest memory of the first time I sat down to play Wolfenstein is when I got my first machine gun. I was shooting one of the blue SS guys point blank with my pistol. It was all I had. My health was getting pretty low, but I took him out first, and then all of a sudden I was blowing away all the other soldiers in the room with this rapid-fire machine gun. The SS guy must have dropped it, and I picked it up without realizing. I played through the shareware version multiple times, and in 1993 bought a Sound Blaster Deluxe audio card for my computer. Wolfenstein was a major motivation for that purchase. I bought that card and a pair of LabTech speakers at Egghead Software, if you remember Egghead. Still use those speakers, actually. Not so much the sound card. I'd like to impress upon you the difference of moving from the internal PC speaker to the Sound Blaster in Wolfenstein 3D. This is what the shareware boss battle sounds like with a PC speaker. And after I installed that Sound Blaster, this is what it sounded like.
Guten Tag. Mutti.
Yeah!
The weapon sounds, the music, the soldiers yelling out, those sounds were impressive, but it was that Guten Tag that really floored me, that made me think that Sound Blaster was worth every penny. I was at a friend's house. They had the full version of Wolfenstein 3D, all 6 levels. Of course, I wanted to copy it for myself, but was stymied by one of the files. vswap.wl6 is 1.5 megabytes, but my floppy, I apparently had a floppy disk with me, could only hold 1.4. This was before I learned about compression, about pkzip and pkunzip, but I stared at the screen wondering how it was possible for such a big file to be on a computer. I'd never seen such a big file before. I think I did eventually get my hands on the full version of Wolfenstein, but I don't know, it's not on any of my backup tapes, so perhaps I deleted it out of guilt. Before doing so, though, I played with level editors. There was a floppy disk that I bought called Wolf 3D Utilities for $3.95. I didn't design anything notable, just played with extremes, designing really huge rooms with lots of stuff in them, and played with swapping out textures. This is how I learned about the Aardwolf promotion. There's a texture in the game that says, "Call Apogee and say Aardwolf." There's supposed to be some type of promotion. The sign was hidden deep within a hidden maze in Mission 2, but the availability of these level editors pretty much ruined the contest. The texture was taken out and replaced in later releases of the game. Speaking of Apogee, and of id Software too, I suppose, I did play some Commander Keen. I got the shareware version of Episode 4, Goodbye Galaxy. I believe it came with a Gravis gamepad controller I bought. I played through that mission, really liked it, and understand the origin of the Dopefish, but didn't get into the rest of the Commander Keen games. 1993 was the second half of my junior year in high school, and a friend of mine there at school, Dave. Everybody should have a friend named Dave. If you don't, go out and find one. Anyway, Dave was trying to get the Sound Blaster working on his computer so that he could play Wolfenstein. That's what he called it, Wolfenstein with an extra T. I would try to help give him ideas one day and hear about how they worked or didn't work the next. I'm pretty sure he got it working eventually, and I'm also pretty sure he never stopped calling it Wolfenstein. About a year later, I had installed a CD-ROM drive in my computer, my 386. I bought it as a kit with a new Sound Blaster, Sound Blaster 16, which had stereo sound versus the mono sound of the old Sound Blaster Deluxe. I bought Spear of Destiny on CD around that time, and thoroughly enjoyed the stereo separation in the game. There were some enhancements in Spear of Destiny too, which were pretty cool, like vines dangling from the ceiling. I didn't play all the way through the game, though. I still have that CD. I still have the original 5¼ inch shareware disc that I bought way back then, and it still works too. I have a computer that I keep around for this retro stuff. I built it in 1996, dual Pentium 200s with 224 megabytes of RAM. I maxed this thing out over the years. It has 2 Voodoo 2 cards running in SLI mode along with a regular 2D video card, 2 hard drives, 2 optical drives, 2 floppy disk drives, even a tape backup drive. This thing is heavy and loud too. But this is how I captured all my DOS Wolfenstein sounds. Except for the PC speaker stuff, I have a free DOS partition on my Core i5, ran the shareware version, and stuck a microphone in the case. I'm getting off track. So, to be honest, I had played and tinkered with Wolfenstein so much by 1994 that I got pretty sick of it. It eventually became a maze of twisty little passages all alike, to quote Colossal Cave Adventure. When I heard Wolfenstein 3D was coming out for the Jaguar, I was thoroughly unimpressed. No way was I going to buy this game. I was so done with Wolfenstein. Electronic Gaming Monthly magazine organized a tour across America, the EGM Super Tour 94. This was the second annual event. I didn't pay any attention to the 1993 tour, but one of the companies sponsoring the 94 tour was Atari, and they were coming not too far from where I lived. So I drove to the mall where they were holding this event, accidentally ran a stop sign I didn't see on the way there, not very familiar with this neighborhood. But fortunately nobody was around to notice. Still felt guilty. Inside the mall it wasn't hard to spot all the kiosks and desks and everything set up for the Super Tour. As expected, there were several Jaguar kiosks there, a few playing games that hadn't been released yet, and the first one that I approached was Wolfenstein 3D. There was no line or anything, so I gave it a quick try, and was floored by the graphics. They looked so much better than what I'd spent dozens of hours staring at on my PC. Also, for some reason in this kiosk version, I already had the flamethrower and rocket launcher. Wait a minute, flamethrower and rocket launcher? They weren't in the DOS version. I changed my mind right there. I would be buying a copy of this game for the Jaguar after all. I bought it from Walden Software when it came out the following month, and yeah, the graphics are great. The ammunition magazines no longer looked like tricorders from Star Trek The Next Generation, but a couple of things really disappointed me. First, the skill levels had different names. I thought it was pretty funny to have the easiest skill level called Can I Play Daddy? With a picture of BJ Blazkowicz in a bonnet and pacifier, but on the Jaguar version, not only do you not have the different pictures of BJ associated with the skill level, you don't even have the same names. Bring 'em On becomes Extra Carnage, and of course, I Am Death Incarnate becomes Maximum Death. Not quite as catchy. When I got into the game, I found that all the soldiers make the same sound when shot. The pitch varies, of course, but it's always... In the DOS version, you have things like and a few others that I didn't capture for the show. The big one was the blue SS guard. In the DOS version, he yells out, Mein Leben, when shot.
Mein Leben!
It means my life in German, and I think it's kind of a silly thing to yell out, but still it's somehow endearing. To this day, when something bad happens to me, instead of dropping the F-bomb or something, I'll try to yell out, Mein Leben, which both helps to defuse the situation, and let's face it, it's pretty classy. So I was disappointed when the Elite Guard in the Jaguar version didn't yell that out. It's just... Yay. The item pickup sounds in the DOS version are all different. Every item had a different sound, so you get weird things like... But on the Jaguar, it's always just... It also bothered me that I couldn't sneak up on soldiers on the Jaguar. They were always looking right at me, and I liked having that gameplay aspect, seeing them from all angles. The levels were different too, but that wasn't a big deal. But the biggest thing was Hans Gross. I was so impressed with
Guten Tag!
on my sound blaster that I felt thoroughly deflated when he yelled
Coming for you!
out of my Jaguar. Now, eventually there are bosses that do yell out Guten Tag,
Guten Tag!
but they come much later in the game, so the initial impression was poor. I missed the ability to switch to specific weapons on the fly. Now, they could have fit all of the weapons on the Jaguar keypad individually and still had room for the map and the 3 save game buttons. Might have had to do something a little creative with the star or pound buttons, or not have the 0 key mute the game. I'm not sure how helpful that is anyway. I did play the game a fair bit, but by the middle of Mission 3, I got tired of it and moved on to other things. When I think of the best version of Wolfenstein 3D, I think of the DOS version. Despite the poor graphics and the scratchy sounds, it has the gameplay elements you can't find on the Jaguar or Super Nintendo or 3DO or Macintosh. This game needs a rating, though, on the Jaguar. On this show, we totally copied Phil the No Swear Gamer's rating system, which places games into categories: Hall of Fame, Solid, Meh, and Trash. Hall of Fame and Trash can only contain 5 titles each. I'm going to give Wolfenstein 3D on the Atari Jaguar a solid rating. While I was researching this game, extracting sounds, and documenting gameplay nuance, I had to stop myself repeatedly from just playing the game. It's fun, it's a lot of fun, it's addicting. Not so much with the cheat codes, but playing it honestly is a blast. The lower difficulties are pretty dull, but the higher ones do present a good challenge. It's one of the better games on the Jaguar, in my opinion, but not one of the top 5. That's my opinion, though. What do you think? On Facebook, I posted a little blurb about Wolfenstein 3D from a Jaguar promotional insert in EGM and asked for your thoughts about the game. BTB, host of the Jaguar on YouTube and way cooler dude than I'll ever be, said, Hall of Fame, coming from a guy who didn't have a computer to play this and Doom on, this game was big. I felt like this was as good as I was going to get playing those 2 id classics on home on my TV. No other system at the time could do it justice. And playing it now, I forgot how crazy fast it is. We covered it over at the Jaguar. Zach replied to this post, saying, loved your video. Good to see the Wolf 3D Jaglove. I've had several people argue that the 3DO version is the best port. Worse textures, lacks the famous Bobby Prince midis, and feels a bit empty, although it's relatively the same and a bit slower. The 3DO version does handle better, but I don't think it's the end-all be-all. Thank you, gentlemen. That is a fun episode of the Jaguar. They're all fun, to be honest, but the Wolfenstein 3D one is really good, so I'll include a link to that Jaguar episode in the show notes. Bjorn says, Hall of Fame for me. The gamepad overlay is a great addition, and the game itself plays well. Best conversion of the game for me. Thank you, Bjorn. Arithia says, for me, Wolfenstein 3D is a nice, solid game. You may not have the ability to sneak up on enemies, but the graphics are gorgeous, the animation is super smooth, and the music is really nice. I really enjoy the game, but there are better games, so this is only a solid game. P.S. I know that lots of people are complaining about the fact that you can't change weapons. This only proves that these people did not play the game very much, because you can switch weapons, but only once you got the Gatling gun and the rocket launcher. You switch between them, actually, you cannot switch between weapons that use the same bullet type. I think you meant flamethrower instead of Gatling gun, but yeah, you can only cycle between 3 different weapons at most. And finally, RD says, we'll go with solid because I think Doom is superior, but they are close. The game looks good, plays great, and is silky smooth. Thank you all for your feedback. I've recorded your votes, and these are included in the episode guide. On Twitter, Rectapete says, Hall of Fame, brilliant game that played beautifully on the Jaguar. If I had any complaint, it's that at times it almost ran too fast. You know, I did see the game slow down once while working on this episode. I don't remember the mission, but I believe it was one of the boss levels, or maybe the second secret level. That one is brutal. But there was this room where, against a wall, there was a large number of ammo crates, more than a dozen, I believe, and turning around in the middle of that to shoot an SS guard behind me, it stuttered a little bit. I didn't expect that. But other than that, yeah, very, very solid and quite fast. Thank you, Pete. Hey, Bishop. I was wondering if we had any text or audio submissions for Wolfenstein 3D.
We do. 2 text submissions, plus 2 submissions for general feedback.
Cool, please load those up on my screen. Wolfenstein feedback first, general feedback after that.
Ready.
Our first message is from Zach. He says, this is it. This is the one that you'll want to pick up. That is, if hunting for keys and peppering Nazi troops full of lead is something that gets you excited, then look no further. Wolfenstein 3D for the Jaguar is the best port of the game to a console, bar none. This is a Hall of Fame game for the Atari Jaguar, thanks to the special treatment from id's John Carmack. The port is a successful non-stop adrenaline rush, with a great soundtrack improved, additional weapons to change strategy, and floor changes to keep it unique and to the point. This game is still as fast-paced as the original, but viable for the Jaguar. I'm disappointed in a few details, like missing sound files, no mein Leben, or the newer weapons being a bit tame in the animation or oomph factor. The flamethrower, although devastating, looks rather plain and sounds tame compared to the sounds of the doors opening and Germans shouting. Nothing new seems to be more exciting and menacing as the already tried and true Gatling gun or the machine pistol. It still has a bit of a maze-like feel, but that's more of a problem with the design era of the games and the mentality of id's developers such as Romero to have more and more secrets. Do yourself a favor and read Masters of Doom, people. But the levels are condensed, and I believe a few even cut completely, but I could be wrong. I'm going off the top of my head, so apologies. The control is a bit awkward and tough, especially when you're getting used to switching between strafing and looking from left to right, but I've managed to forgive these on the basis that this port brings more than it removes to fit on the cart. To me, this is the game that keeps my Jaguar plugged in and ready to go. Whereas with Wolf 3D is a bit of a headache on modern computers, this port being so well keeps the action easily accessible and progress saved, which is a great feature. Although Doom is also on the system, the revamped MIDI music, the grinning BJ Blazkowicz, and near-perfect port of the game keeps it miles ahead of the Doom port. So in the end, if you're in the mood for a classic FPS, but on the console, look no further. I can say with full confidence the Atari Jaguar version is very faithful to the original and improved in some ways. If only Quake made it to the Jaguar as well, imagine that. Hall of Fame. Eva auf Wiedersehen. Ah yes, I'm glad you mentioned Masters of Doom. I was going to talk about that book a little bit during the Storytime segment, but I should probably acknowledge in the episode proper that Masters of Doom was a great, huge resource of information, supremely helpful in building out the developer history, and I bought the book just for this show, well, the next one too, I guess, and I'm only halfway through it, so don't tell me how it ends. Let's see, you talked about the strafing control being a bit awkward at first. I guess it depends where you're coming from. Coming from the PC version, it felt perfectly natural to me. Doom introduced dedicated strafe keys, but for Wolfenstein, the only way to strafe was by holding down another key and using the arrows. Or I guess holding down a key and using the mouse. I didn't use the mouse at all back then, not for Wolfenstein. I remember seeing people trying to play Wolfenstein with a mouse, and the only way to play it was to continually pick up the mouse, push it forward, pick it up, and start over from the bottom of the mouse pad. Like this. That sound comes through. It looked like a terrible way to play, and actually turned me off from using a mouse to control first-person shooters all the way through Quake 2. It wasn't until Half-Life that I finally adopted the keyboard and mouse combo, the WASD and mouse look. But man, I rocked the keyboard. I'll talk about that more in the Doom episode. So I guess coming from the Super Nintendo version or coming back from the 3DO version, the lack of dedicated strafe buttons might be an issue, but for me it felt just right. I would have preferred a separate button for opening doors though. You said that this is the best port of the game to a home console, and yeah, I would totally agree with that. Our next message is from Jagosaurus on Atari Age. This one came through the Atari Age private message system, but I get those as an email as well, so they land on Bishop's radar.
It's not radar, it's IMAP.
Well, yeah, whatever. It's all feedback, and all feedback is good, as long as it's honest. Jagosaurus says, I spent a lot of the summer of 1995 playing Wolfenstein 3D on my buddy's PC upstairs in his room, hiding from the Texas heat. The concept of the secret doors and shooting Nazis was amazing. As with many, it was the first FPS I had laid eyes on. We had sunk hours and hours, days and days, into playing this. We were a few years late to the party by 95, but didn't know it as we were young at the time. We eventually ended up with a copy of Doom. I'll save that for an upcoming episode. Yep, coming up next episode. Feel free to send that in. With that background in mind, I went on a week-long summer camping and fishing trip with my dad and sister to a nearby lake. I believe that trip was in mid-August of 95 that summer. We pulled over on the way home to call my mom and check in on a payphone. Yes, to anyone younger than me listening, payphones weren't just part of the Matrix. Well, my dad climbs back into the truck and tells us that my mom just bought our first family computer. This was exciting news to me, and I remember the anxious 2-hour drive home well. I had experience in school with DOS and early builds of Windows. This would have been Windows 2, 3.0, and 3.1. So I had many questions my dad couldn't answer. We came home to a large 386 Hewlett-Packard running Windows 95 with a beautiful VGA CRT monitor. My mom knew I enjoyed computers at school and at my buddies, so this machine now lived in my room. It was only a week or so before I had copies of Wolf 3D and Doom now running via virtual DOS within Windows 95 in my room. My mom was shocked to see her young son typing command lines. Ha ha ha. She still talks about that. I associate Wolf 3D with my first computer and that memorable summer. Great times with a great game and using that computer together as a family. I didn't get a hold of the Jag port until 2012. Yeah, 17 years later for my first exposure to the game. I immediately noticed that the sprites and resolution looked very sharp and the game ran extremely smooth on the Jaguar. The status bar at the bottom had been removed in favor of simply showing ammo, etc. over the game screen. This changed the visual look and gave you more screen real estate to view the gameplay. I think removing the points and extra lives in favor of the Doom health system was a welcome addition. By the time this was released for the Jaguar, the target audience was likely getting into Doom. Also, the music seems jazzier, if that's a word. I dig it. Humming it right now, actually, so it made an impression. While I'm no expert on the version differences of the game, I've read that the Jag port is similar to the Mac port regarding weapons and sprite resolution. I'm sure you'll deep dive into the history of the port as it relates to counterparts, Shinto. Looking forward to it. On the Jaguar, this was a Hall of Fame for me, top 5 game. I wish more Jaguar games had this level of polish. If id Software really did program this in one weekend, wow, kudos. Wolf 3D as a whole is a standout title for me. That's great, Jagosaurus. That's really cool. I'm glad you have strong personal memories of Wolfenstein 3D and playing it with your family. It wasn't really programmed in a weekend, though I see that repeated often. According to the interview with Edge Magazine, Carmack said that he had the functional part of the Super Nintendo version running in about 15 CDs, I believe. So, around 15 hours? Getting the updated sprites and textures, tuning and polish, that took at least 3 weeks, possibly more. Let's see, in my notes, I see that it first appeared in Atari Explorer Online's issue for March 7, 1994. Attributed to Imagineer Company, actually. They distributed the Super Nintendo and perhaps other versions. And it went into production June 20th, so that's close to 4 months, start to finish, including testing and manual and box art and stuff. Still a remarkably short time for such a polished game. We have some general feedback from Hugh. He says, just a quick note to say that I saved the Iron Soldier show until I was traveling in Tokyo. It seemed appropriate and allowed me to picture giant mechs trudging around Akihabara. Sadly, the mechs must have destroyed all evidence of Jaguar games there before I could find them. But there are plenty of 30-yen copies of Golf for the Famicom that avoided destruction. I'm also including a 1998 Telegames USA catalog that shows their Jaguar inventory along with an ad for Iron Soldier 2. Did you ever do any ordering through Telegames? I never did any ordering through Telegames, but I sure looked at their catalog a lot, probably their online catalog. The cover of the one that you sent looks familiar, but looking at the contents, I'm pretty sure I didn't have this one. No, I didn't have this one, but I did really think about ordering from Telegames on many occasions. It was just that back then, 96, 97, I had bought my first home, and with that comes many unexpected expenses, and I just couldn't afford to buy anything from them. Their prices, well, they seemed fairly high at the time. Not unreasonable, but not something that I would approach without careful consideration. It's kind of a shame if I had known how much some of these games would sell for down the road, but again, I simply did not have the money. Hey, Hugh, didn't you send Ferg feedback from China? Must be spending quite a bit of time in East Asia. That sounds cool. There's some fantastic food in Beijing. If you go to a typical Chinese restaurant here in the States, and yeah, they've got that type of food in China too, but it seems to be in the minority. I'm going to pick this up in the Storytime segment. I'm getting off track here, but thank you, Hugh, for your feedback. Speaking of Ferg and the Atari 2600 Game by Game podcast, this is back on topic, I promise. Episode 125, Part 2, Ferg mentioned that the Retro Junkies Super Show recently did an episode about Wolfenstein 3D. Retro Junkies Super Show isn't typically on my radar, to be honest.
Don't you mean on your RSS feed?
Yeah, sure, Bishop. Really going on about radar today. So I missed this, but Ferg mentioned it, so I downloaded the episode and gave it a listen. They go into different directions than I have here, talking about some of the later Wolfenstein games and more about the violence controversy, Supernova's Arc 3D. So check that out if you want. I'm including a link to that episode in the show notes, episode 22 of the Retro Junkies Super Show. One of the hosts said that he didn't know about the Jaguar version. Maybe I should submit an application for my podcast to their network. They're also coincidentally covering Doom in their next episode. If that episode isn't out yet, it probably will be soon. And finally, we got a message from Liam, just yesterday, actually. He says, "Hey, Shinto, I recently found your podcast whilst looking for some retro video game podcasts to listen to, and I stumbled across the Jaguar Game by Game podcast. I'm really enjoying the podcast because it is about a console that I never knew about growing up in England, as I grew up with a Genesis then a PlayStation 1 or 2. I really like how much detail you go into explaining the console in episode 1 as well as the games themselves. If Jaguar, the English pronunciation as I am English, prices weren't so high in England, I would consider picking one up as a console seems fascinating. I'm really enjoying learning about the console and also understanding more about how the console functions with each game. The amount of detail you go into explaining every aspect of the game makes the podcast one of my favorites to listen to. Anyways, keep up the awesome podcast." Thank you, Liam. I worry about going into too much detail here on the show. Do people really care about every aspect of the interface or the minutia of the pause button? So I'm glad that you like the detail because I'm pretty sure I couldn't skip over things like that. Even if I tried, I couldn't do it. The Jaguar is it's a fascinating console, I think. It's more than just a footnote or punchline, but a unique and distinctive video game system with some unique and distinctive games. Well, there are a lot of quick and dirty 16-bit Genesis ports too, but overall I think that it's definitely worth a conversation. It is getting rather expensive though, and that's a shame, but inevitable, I assume. Thanks again, Liam, and welcome aboard. That's all I have for this episode of the Atari Jaguar Game by Game podcast. I do thank you for joining me, for listening, and for lending your feedback. We are finishing the id Software duology next episode with Doom, and then Dragon the Bruce Lee Story, Zool 2, and Val d'Isere Skiing and Snowboarding. If you have any feedback, any thoughts or memories about these upcoming games, anything I've already covered, or about the show in general, please send that in, text or audio, to jaguar@gamebygamepodcast.com. All show information, Twitter, Facebook, RSS, email, all that can be found on the web at jaguar.gamebygamepodcast.com. I've got a couple things I wanted to talk about in the Storytime segment coming up after the music. It's totally optional, and I wouldn't blame you if you skipped it. But before you hit that stop button, remember that there is a lot of good to be found out there in this world of ours, so do try to keep an open mind and a joyful heart. Thank you for listening. Jaguar, Jaguar, Jaguar.
And now, story time with Shinto.
In my previous episode, Iron Soldier, I asked if you would like more transparency in my episode progress, because I have a hard time keeping a rigid, consistent schedule with this podcast. The length of time it takes to put an episode together depends on the game itself, and real-life things going on with my family and new job and everything. So I didn't get a lot of feedback on that specifically, but I did come up with a solution that keeps anyone interested up to date with the show without cluttering up your Facebook or Twitter feeds. I've been using the episode guide as the latest source of information, but it's a Google Docs spreadsheet, and as such is very slow to load. It has a long, ugly URL, and updating it, just adding a simple note, is also surprisingly time-consuming on my end. Web apps, what can you do? But then it hit me. I have a webpage, jaguar.gamebygamepodcast.com. See, Liam, I can keep it up. I say that all the show information can be found there, but why not put this information on that page? It's a one-off in the process that rebuilds the whole gamebygamepodcast.com site twice a day, but that's okay. I run the site. I should be able to add a one-off if I wanted to. So going forward, if you're curious about how the next episode is shaping up, check out jaguar.gamebygamepodcast.com. It's, even with this extra information, it should still be small enough if you wanted to fit the whole page on your Atari 1050 disk drive. Not that you'd necessarily want to, but it's a neat metric. Masters of Doom by David Kirshner. It didn't take long trying to research the history of id Software to realize that I needed a copy of this book. So I went to my local library, not physically of course, but their cyber shelf where you can check out ebooks. They didn't have it, not at all, so I bought the ebook from Barnes & Noble for my Nook. Now, I was not much of a reader in my youth. I would read a book every once in a while, every couple years maybe, and I would pride myself on never having checked out a book from the school library during high school. I did check one out late in my senior year, Catcher in the Rye, but I never read it. I would still do book reports for school, a couple a year, but never read more than the back of the book if it had a synopsis on the back cover. I still did okay with book reports, probably because I was such a good writer that my teachers felt charitable. But all that changed about 5 years ago when I bought a Barnes & Noble Nook Simple Touch. It's an e-reader, e-ink display, and everything that goes with it. Very readable in all kinds of light, battery life measured in months, and unlike the Amazon Kindles at the time, had a touchscreen instead of a physical keyboard, which is just fine for an e-reader. I don't mind having multiple gadgets as long as they do their one job very, very well, and this Nook Simple Touch did just that. Another advantage for me over the Kindle was that it was compatible with my library, with EPUB books, so I could check them out online, go through some ugly DRM voodoo because I'm a Linux user and the DRM software only worked on Windows. There was no Kindle support at all at the library. There is now. It was added about a year later, but the Kindle, to my knowledge, still can't read EPUB formatted books. You can download EPUBs from anywhere. Feedbooks.com, for example, has public domain books you can download. This Nook has turned me into a voracious reader. If you're familiar with Humble Bundle, the name-your-own-price service, they have ebook bundles, mostly comic books it would seem, which don't interest me in the least, but every once in a while they throw out a bundle of sci-fi or thriller or horror novels, and I've bought several of those. They turned me on to authors and series that I wouldn't have otherwise found, like the Clockwork Century series by Cherie Priest, the Spin Trilogy by Robert Charles Wilson, Jumper series by Stephen Gould. Some of these I could download from my library, and some I would just buy from Barnes & Noble. I caught up on many of the books I was probably supposed to have read in high school, but never did. Books like The Scarlet Letter, Atlas Shrugged, Great Gatsby, Tale of Two Cities. Since this reader doesn't have any type of built-in light, they do now, but didn't then, I bought a cheap clip-on light from Target, cracked it open and installed some red cellophane in front of the lights to give it a reddish tint. The red is easier on the eyes than a bright white or bluish white. When I was flying back and forth across the Pacific a lot, many of the flights were at night, and I would use this light with the red tinting on my Nook so that I didn't disturb others who were trying to sleep. I remember reading H.P. Lovecraft coming back from Auckland. I didn't sleep at all that flight. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of Amazon.com. I'm a Prime member, all that. I very nearly took a job offer from them. They offered a good salary and generous stock grant, which would have been worth a small fortune today, but this was right at the beginning of the collapse of the housing bubble, asking prices for homes which are far higher than the actual selling prices, and we would have lost a lot of money in the move. Despite Amazon's relocation assistance. If I had known back then how much that stock would be worth today, though, wow. So as much as I do like Amazon, I have no interest in the Kindle. For me, the Barnes & Noble Nook is where it's at, and no, this is not a paid endorsement. Okay, Chinese food. I had some amazing food in Beijing. Unfortunately, I can't remember most of it, what it was called. Part of that is because my Mandarin is terrible. Well, spoken Mandarin is passable, but I'm quite illiterate when it comes to reading or writing the language. My hosts were gracious and generous, and they took us to many of the best places around Beijing. But even elsewhere, there is a beef and noodle shop we went to. Well, I guess it was considered high-end for a chain restaurant. They had the most remarkable kumquat lemon tea. The cow's stomach was pretty good, too. I could only eat one piece because it's freaking cow's stomach, but I had to try it. I was also surprised by the beer in China. Well, most of the time when you think of Chinese beer, you think of Yanjing. But I didn't care for that at all, and nobody I met there drank that. They were all into Tsingtao, and that was quite good, actually. I'm not even a beer person. Can't get Tsingtao in the States, though, not that I've been able to find. One more quick story about Chinese food. We were working out of the office, and they brought food in. Chinese food, obviously, a whole lot like what you would find at a number of ordinary Chinese restaurants in the States. My coworker ordered a sweet and sour shrimp. In America, when you order shrimp, you get a shrimp tail cut and peeled. Not so in my coworker's order. That was the full organism, legs, eyes, digestive system, everything. After some significant hesitation, he ate it, said it was good, but I used this little story at my kids' school. They would have core knowledge culture days, learning about different cultures, and I would go in to talk about China. I'd talk about the people I met, great people, by the way, teach the kids some Mandarin, basic greetings and pleasantries, and I would tell them the story of the shrimp, but include a picture that I took, zoomed in, nice and close. They would all say, ew, but, don't knock it till you tried it. That slice of boiled and seasoned cow stomach actually wasn't bad at all. I'm going to dial it back here a bit. I didn't plan on talking about this, but just before recording, I was using my tablet to capture some silly little thing for the very end of the show. And as I looked at the tablet, I saw that there were already some recordings on there. I had no idea what these were. They were from 2 years ago. I was just about to delete them all, but just in case figured I should see what they actually were. These are recordings of my wife's grandfather talking about the war, which he very seldom did. He served in the Army, Infantry, European Theater, fought in the Battle of the Bulge, and is one of the strongest men I've met. We talk casually about wasting Nazis from the comfort of our chairs, and he was out there fighting them for real. In one of these recordings, he was talking about how he volunteered to go get some wounded soldiers and bring them back, but he had to cross the Rhine to do it in the middle of the night. They got in their boat and started across the river when the Nazis launched flares to light up the whole area and opened fire from their machine gun nests. As he talked about trying desperately to get back to cover while he and his buddies were being chopped up with automatic weapons fire, he couldn't do it. He broke up. One of the strongest men I've ever met was overwhelmed with emotion and had to stop. Wolfenstein 3D is fun, but that was war, and it was not. The Greatest Generation is called that for a reason. Well, several reasons. So I know it was a long time ago, and a lot of them are gone now, but please don't forget the sacrifices they made so that we can live in the freedom that we now enjoy. It kind of goes without saying that I immediately made multiple backups of those recordings. I hate to end on such a somber note, but, for some reason I feel like I need to. Fortunately, I have no family members who fought back the denizens of hell on a remote Martian outpost, at least as far as I know, so the next episode should have a more upbeat ending. I'm going to close out with a song from the DOS version of Wolfenstein 3D. The song is not on the Jaguar. It's by Bobby Prince called Wondering About My Loved Ones. It plays during the main menu. I captured this directly off my Sound Blaster for that authentic ad-lib audio sound. So enjoy, and I will talk to you next time.